Media Webinar Series. And tonight we're going to talk about how do we get media to come to our events, and then what the heck do we do if they actually show up? So how can we give a good interview? This is Kara, and I'm joined again tonight with Kayla Soren, who's our KSEC Media Liaison. So we're going to start by talking about getting media coverage. A lot of times we want to get media coverage for different events that we have going on, or maybe the launch of a new campaign, or to hold people accountable for things that they promised to us. And so there's a whole range of reasons why we want to get media to come and cover our stories. And it seems like it could be pretty daunting, the idea of trying to reach out to a reporter and get them to come cover your story. You might even think, like, is my story worth getting covered? But there's actually a real simple sort of process for getting the media to come and cover your event. And the good thing is it's not up to you to decide if your story is worth telling. The reporter will know what needs to be run and what sort of things are worth telling. So the first thing that it takes to get the media to come cover your event is to provide a newsworthy story. And we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. How can we frame our stories in a way that's going to that reporters are going to want to cover it? And then once you have your story figured out and the angle that you're wanting to present, you want to have a press advisory, you want to make pitch calls, and you want to have a press release. And we're going to go through all of those things in the next few slides. So when we're thinking about the story that we're telling, and we've been talking a lot about, having a narrative or having a story, thinking about what message it is that you want to put out there, and trying to control, what the message is that goes out into the media. But you can also think about the framing of your story and highlight certain aspects of it when you're talking to reporters that help them feel like the story is more newsworthy. And so the first thing that makes something newsworthy is that it's new. And we talked about this a little bit in our last webinar as well. News happens right now, not 2 weeks from now. And so reporters are looking to cover things that are very current. Reporters are also interested in things that are local. So having a local story or a local angle is a very newsworthy thing for your story to have. Maybe that connects to something bigger, but you can highlight how it's relevant locally. Having a human interest angle, and so this is like the classic cat in a tree story that you might hear of. Having human interest means that it's something that it sort of tugs on someone's heartstrings. Stories are also newsworthy if there's conflict or there's controversy. Things that have clear sides on an issue or things that are controversial make for a really juicy story, and that's what reporters are looking to cover. Right along with that, also having strange bedfellows in your story makes it really newsworthy. Strange bedfellows are just unlikely allies. So KSEC is getting ready to launch a new Fair Coal Severance Fund campaign where we're trying to make sure that 100% of coal severance money goes back into coal-impacted communities. And so our story is going to be very newsworthy because this is an instance where environmentalists and a lot of coal communities can really be friends and agree on an issue. Everyone should agree that coal severance funds should go back into the communities where coal was mined and processed. A good story also has really good visuals, especially if you're thinking about a news story on the TV. So if you want to have like television reporters come to your story, you really want to have good visuals so they can get that picture. And the same goes for newspapers as well. They want to really have a good image to go along with the story. And then, like I said earlier, having something that's new and timely is a really great way to make sure that your story is newsworthy. Kayla, do you want to tell us about the next section?
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about press advisor story. You have to let the media know that's going to happen. So what a press advisory does is that it informs the media to come to your event. So you need to come up with an interesting story and show that your story is actually really interesting, just like that's the reason it's happening. So Your press advisory just encourages the media to attend your event, and it's really simple and easy to write. So the basics of a press advisory is that you need to write who, what, where, when, and why. So really the biggest, like the only part you really have to write a lot for, or just write a few sentences for, is the what and the why. The who, where, and when are, you just write a few words about that. So as you can see, press advisories only take a few minutes to write, and they're not very hard, but they actually can have like huge outcomes from media coming to your event and getting a lot of people knowing about your event. But the important thing to note about a press advisory is that they do not give away the substance of the event. An advisory should be sent out several days before an event and followed up with phone calls to the reporters, because often the email boxes of reporters get filled up with a lot of different emails, so they might have not even seen your email. So if you follow up with a phone call, you ensure that the reporter saw your email and that you can do a further notification and ensure that more media will be there. So a phone call is essential to getting reporters to actually show up to your event.
Yeah, definitely. And that phone call that you make when you send out your press advisory is called a pitch call. It's just a really quick call that you make to a reporter to make sure that they know that the press advisory is sitting in their inbox and that they know how awesome your story is going to be. And pitch calls can seem really intimidating. I know when I first started doing media work, I dreaded making the pitch calls. And I almost considered just not making them. But like Kayla said, reporters get lots of emails, lots of press advisories, and it's a good chance that your story will not be covered if you don't make a pitch call. And reporters get pitch calls all the time. It's literally the way that this process works. And so having these calls is really the industry standard for working with the media. And I like to really think about it as if, you know, if you're not going to bother to make the pitch call, you might as well not even bother with the press advisory and the press releases, because there's like almost no chance that you're going to get coverage just by sending off an email, especially if you don't have a relationship with a reporter. And ideally, we want to use these pitch calls to not only tell people about the story that we're pitching this time, but also to start to build a relationship with the people who cover news in your area, because those relationships are going to be really key in making sure that you continue to get good media coverage as your campaign or organization develops. So once you have done your pitch call, the next thing that you need to worry about is writing a press release. Kayla, do you want to tell us?
Yeah, I was on mute, sorry.
No worries.
So your press release is something that already happened. It can be what an article you want to look like about your event. So it's the ideal article. So what's really important with your with the press releases is to remember your audience and to use quotes from your members. So for a press release, you want to make sure that you're getting your message across. So the messages we've talked in our last or our other webinar, we talked about how to frame your messages. So you need to remember those messages and make them really clear in the press release. So a press release should follow an inverted pyramid structure with the most important information on top. So first, you have the most newsworthy information. So that's the kind of information that you put in the press advisory, which is the who, what, when, where, how, and why. Then you have the important details, and then you have other general information or background information. This makes it more likely that a person will read through the entire article or just like start reading, because the most newsworthy info provides a hook for the readers so that they'll continue reading. So also a press release should be kept to one page, because you want to make it sure it's short and it's just concise enough to just get your messages across. And it should be sent out the day of the event, so that hopefully the next morning or the next few days later it will be published about your event. Because if it's published many weeks later, then it's not newsworthy anymore.
Awesome. And so that is how you get your event covered by the media. You start by making sure that your story is newsworthy. You write your press advisory, follow it up with a pitch call, and then you write your press release. You can also print extra copies of your press release and bring them with you to the event and make sure that each reporter who shows up gets one of those press releases in their hands. And that just helps to make sure that the reporter gets all of the facts straight as well, because you have exactly the quotes that you want to be printed. You have people's names spelled out and things like that, and that just makes it really easy and straightforward. But what else do you want to do when the reporter actually shows up to cover your event? Well, you want to give a good interview, probably, hopefully. And the best way to learn how to give a good interview is sometimes to give a bad interview, which is what I did the first time that I was interviewed for television media. And it was in 2010, and I was down in Florida doing some work around the BP oil disaster. And I was at a rally on the beach in Miami, and I had a television reporter come up to me and start to interview me. And I was doing so well. I was talking about the need for us to lessen our dependence on fossil fuels, and I was talking about the impacts of the oil drilling, and I was giving all of these really good messages to the reporter, talking about the need for us to transition to clean, renewable energy, and how this is a great opportunity to do that. But the interviewer kept trying to ask me questions about the way that I was feeling, sort of wanting to know how the BP oil disaster was sort of impacting my feelings. And at one point I said really quickly, well, I would hate to think anything we're doing in the ocean would harm the animals in the ocean. And then I moved on to my next message point of, transition and renewable energy. And later when I saw the interview clip on the internet, the only piece of the interview that was used was my little short, well, I'd hate to think that anything we were doing would harm the animals in the ocean. And it's true, I would hate that, but it was not what I was there to tell the reporter about that day. And it left me looking like, the hippie tree hugger that I didn't want to portray in the media. And so giving a good interview can be kind of intimidating, but just like getting press coverage, there's a really simple way to go about doing it and preparing yourself so that you don't end up like me. So giving a good interview really comes down to having your spokespeople chosen up front, making sure that they're prepped with talking points, written down and printed out, making sure that they stay on message, and no matter how hard the interviewer tries, just keep repeating your message, and practicing. Practicing is really, really key. So we're going to go through those a little bit more in detail.
So first you have to choose your spokespeople that will ensure that they'll be as to emphasize messages are the most important thing you're trying to come across in your interviews. So a media spokesperson is the face and the voice of your campaign. So you want to make sure that person is well versed in the event or the campaign, and you want to make sure that person has practice saying to their message. So this ensures that you are directly getting out of the media what your event aims to do. Then you have to develop talking points. So for review, you can look to messaging and framing that help us reach our audience and move them towards action, because remember, first you want to reach them with your messages and then show how they can actually take action with those messages. So you can look at our past webinars for that. But what are the most important things to convey? You want to pick 3 or 4 things and no more than that, because 3 or 4 things ensures that you're getting a broad enough base, but you're also being concise enough so that people remember what you're saying. So in your talking points, you need to address the problem, solution, and call to action, because addressing these 3 things will ensure that you're making people aware of the problem, but also giving them a solution to the problem and giving them a way where they can directly make a change. So you need to think about your audience and use the framing techniques that we've talked about. And then make sure you type up your messages so you can have a clear idea and everyone be on the same page with your spokespeople ahead of time.
The next thing to remember is staying on message. I can't say it enough that you should stay on message. And a great way to do that is to make sure that you practice with your spokespeople ahead of time. I always like to do a role play where we have somebody trying to throw the craziest questions possible at our spokespeople, and they just continue to practice relaying the message. And then another good thing to think about when you're thinking about staying on message is the ABCs of interviews. So A is acknowledge the question. That's a really great question. B is bridge away from the question. But what I'm here to talk about today is, and C is communicate your message, the need for a just transition to renewable energy. So acknowledge the question, bridge away from the question, and communicate your message. It's as easy as the ABCs. So our rules for working with the media are stay on message, never lie. If you don't know the answers to something, that's okay. You don't have to be an expert. You can always say, can I follow up with you after the interview with some more information about that? We never want to lie or make something up on the spot because we don't want our credibility to be ruined. Once your credibility is ruined, it's really hard to fix that. Another rule is to never thank them for writing a story. Reporters really aim to be unbiased. They want to report both sides or all sides of an issue. And so if you thank a reporter for writing a story about your event or your issue, they might feel like they were not being good at being unbiased. And it's their job to write stories, so the best practice is to never thank them. Another rule is that there's no off the record. So even if a reporter says that something's off the record, they can still report it. What they might do is report it without your name, saying something like an anonymous source said blah, 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 blah. But they can still use that information, and sometimes that information can still be traced back to you. So just remember that while there's no off the record, reporters definitely have an angle for a story that they're looking for, and they want to get that angle. But it's also good to remember that reporters are not the enemy. They're just trying to do their job and get a good story. And so another rule that's actually not listed here is that it's totally okay to talk to the reporter before the interview to ask them what sort of questions they're going to ask you, or if there's an angle that they're hoping to cover, so that you all can be on the same page. And the last rule is stay on message. A peer of mine who was helping me work on media stuff told me once that you know you're saying your message enough when you feel like a broken record. And chances are, after you've bridged away from their question and communicated your message enough, the reporter will start to pick up on the fact that you are A, trained in how to work with the media, and B, here to tell a very specific message, and you won't be swayed. So that's the end of our webinar on how to get media coverage and give good interviews. And this concludes our 4-part media webinar series. So thanks so much for joining us. These webinars are going to be downloaded and then uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is KY Student Environmental Coalition. And feel free to reach out to us and let us know what other webinars you might be interested in, or if you have questions or need support in getting some media coverage. Hope you have a great night.
Thank you. That was great, girls.
You're welcome.